Welcome to the Life of Phys Podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Martin. On this episode, I have Jonny Edward. Jonny is an internationally renowned photographer, art director, and creative educator based in Denver, Colorado. Through the medium of photography and poetic interplay of light and shadow, Jonny crafts captivating visual narratives that celebrate authenticity and individuality. Compelled by the magic and diversity of humanity, Jonny strives to imbue his art with an untangible, yet unmistakable essence of genuine, heartfelt connection rooted in love and gratitude. Now let's hear a word from our podcast partner and get to the show. The Life of Phys Podcast is lit by Hobolight. Hobolight is on a mission to empower creators to elevate their creativity with lighting kits made to last and built to inspire. These lights are bold, beautiful, and powerful because Hobolight believes that your lights deserve to be seen. To learn more, follow them on Instagram at HOBOLITE.
Hey all, I am Jonny Edward. I am an editorial portrait photographer, art director, and creative educator based in Denver, Colorado, although I work coast to coast and I also work internationally. More than anything else, I'm just driven by humanity, by human connection, by people, by their stories, by their journeys. And that's what sort of informs me in my work. So I'm super stoked to be here and grateful for the opportunity to just chat a little bit.
I'm so grateful for you giving us the time today, Jonny. I found you on Threads, actually, so just a few months ago, and I've been inspired by the work that you put out, the effort you put into set design, the effort you put into creativity, the way you capture a true essence of the people you are shooting. How long have you been doing the portrait stuff and the set design and the creativity aspect of it?
Well, firstly, thank you for the kind words, and that's awesome that we met on Threads. I still I think it's one of the healthiest social platforms out there right now, and I won't get sidetracked into that. That could be a talk that we have later, but that's really rad, and I appreciate all the kind words. So I've been behind the camera in, I guess, a more significant way for about a decade now. So I came to photography in a really dark point in my life, and at first it was just like sunsets, flowers, street, basically everything. Shadows, field mice, it didn't matter. Like I would take photos of garbage. I felt so good behind the camera and it made me really comfortable and feel great. So it was just a lot of stuff that I was informed a little bit from my youth too. So when I was younger, growing up, I had like a Polaroid camera for a while. I shot a little bit of street with film, but it was very haphazard. I always enjoyed it, but never gave myself to it. So I've been behind the camera for about a decade, reasonably. And then I've been doing portraiture for probably about 8 years or so. I sort of stumbled into that. At some point, someone was like, "Hey, Jonny, you're good behind the camera. I need a headshot. Can you do it for me?" And I'm like, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And I did it. And they're like, "Let me give you money." And the idea of taking money for my art made me sick. And so I literally ran away and just gave them their photos. And then a couple of years later, probably about 7 years ago or so, I started getting into fashion work. And it was a similar sort of stumbling into thing. You know, people were like, "Hey, you got a great eye for lines. You like to dress up yourself. You got a great eye for color. Why don't you try this?" And so I just started doing it and people started paying me for it. And then I got into the studio. So it's probably around that time, about 7 years ago, I was like, "Hey, if I'm going to be doing like commercial work or working with designers, I need to be able to control all of the variables, especially out here in Colorado. The weather changes minute to minute. You know, it's like 90 degrees 1 minute and then snowing the next. You can't count on the weather for literally anything." So I got into a studio that was this little 200 square foot studio with like 8-foot ceilings and had no idea what I was doing. And I had one off-camera flash that I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't work. And it was just this nonsense. But that was sort of the start of it. And I'm just an obsessive person. Like when I dive into something, I dive head first. And so I just started giving myself to it and found canvas backdrops and, really started getting into theatrical stuff and cinematic stuff in terms of influence. And the more that I sort of dove into the lighting side of it and the set design set, the more I realized that by expanding my skill set there, I could better honor the people who were in front of my camera. And that's really what it all comes back down to me. So I'm obsessed with the technical things, not because I think that they matter overtly, but because the better I am on the technical side, the better I can be for the people who I'm fortunate enough to be able to have in front of my camera. And it really comes down to this idea of gratitude and service and just love for people more than anything else. And that's what's driven me this entire time.
It's so important to be so gracious and have that gratitude towards, like we were talking in the beginning, you went through a pretty hard time, like I did. And we had an instant connection and we were both like, damn, okay, this is sick because now we're comfortable. Let's just get on with it.
Yep.
When I look at your work, so if just so everybody knows now, because I say it almost every episode, I'm looking at another screen here.
Gotcha.
Where the camera's here.
Yeah.
And I have your stuff up on the screen here. But just, you're so detailed with the set. Like, it's crazy. You look at it, and then you look at it again, and you look at it again, and you've seen 3 different things you never noticed. How long does it take you to set up something like this?
So now not nearly as long, simply because of the size of my studio. So like where I'm sitting right now, this is just like a sort of pseudo permanent set in the studio. So I have about 3,000 square feet of space. So there are probably 6 to 7 sort of foundational sets in the studio that have different colors. There's like concrete colors, there's browns, taupes, creams, industrial looking stuff, really soft, ethereal stuff. So I sort of have that as the base, and then I build into it relative to my subject, the concept, the idea, or just being creatively experimental. So, you know, it's hard to be honest, that's actually a really complicated question to answer. I'm doing the politician thing. I'm like, well, actually, that's a fantastic question when I think about what the fuck I'm going to say. But it's weird because I'm sure that you can relate to this in your own way, obviously with your art forms, but my brain really never turns off. So not having a 9 to 5, like I say, it doesn't take long, but if I actually give myself credit, if I'm coming in for a session, if we have a session tomorrow, I'm thinking of it today. And I'm thinking about how I'm going to piece things together. And there's sort of that structuring going on in my brain. So overtly, if I'm standing in the studio, it might only take, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get a set to where I want it to be. But that also is me thinking about it hours a day, consciously and subconsciously, for a week or a month prior. But I think at this point, it's a little bit second nature, and I'm very big on minimalism too. So there's the details are always, or I try and keep them harmonious and polished in my pictures. But if something doesn't add to the story that I'm telling, or something doesn't work for the individual who's in the frame, I just take it out. So normally, like when I'm designing, if I was like designing my home, I'm a maximalist. Like I'd have shit on every wall, on every floor. It would be fucking nuts. It'd look like an Irish pub or something, just floor to ceiling. But like for my sets, I go the opposite way. So even the set I'm sitting on now, like if I was photographing you, there's a good chance you would come in and sit in this place, and I would look at it and go like, actually, those ladders aren't doing anything. They're not adding anything to the story, and I'm going to take them away. And I would keep taking things away until it felt right. But then it just depends too. Obviously, there's more complicated sets or commercial projects that I build, but I try and operate intuitively. I guess that's the best way of putting it. So I'm very driven by feel. Well, you need to have your camera at exactly 5.6, and you need to meter at f.8, and your subject needs to be in the lower 1/3 of the frame. I'm like, fuck all of that. Like, I'm not a technician. I'm not working on an assembly line. So I go by feel. And if it feels right, I keep it. And if it doesn't, I leave it. And I just sort of move that way when I'm working with someone too. And I'm open about it. So if you were sitting in front of me, I'd be like, hey, I thought this was going to be a great idea. This idea actually fucking sucks. That has nothing to do with you. That's me. I'm going to get this to where it looks amazing. Just give me a few minutes and let's keep talking while I'm doing that.
We have a fine arts school here in Langley, where I live. And I've gone in and spoke with the photo 9-10 majors about my journey, the pitfalls I've dealt with, and trying to help them move forward.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I say, besides make sure you're having fun, is I always say, forget the rules.
Yeah, it's true.
Some of my best photos I've taken that people have loved, there was not a single rule followed. And that's how I shoot today. Like I just took on the next year, I'm going to shoot with the Ricoh GR3X. That's it.
I love that. That's such a badass camera too.
Yeah. Nothing else. I have the teleconverter for it as well. So it gives me a 75.
Yep.
But that's it. I'm going to do that. And in a year, all the photos I've taken, the ones that I like, are going to go into a book.
Yeah.
So
phenomenal.
That's the plan. You do workshops, commercial work. I know I see you in new places all the time.
Yeah.
So this is your full-time gig.
It is, yeah.
That's incredible, man. How's it feel? How's it feel to have this as...
It's incredible. Like it's incredible. I still don't believe it. There are those times where I don't believe it. And it's weird, like because of what I dealt with as a kid, and like we had talked about before, like so much trauma, it's very easy for me to slip into almost like a dissociative state. Like I can get into that survival mode really quick where I'm not even noticing what's around me. So that'll even happen in the studio like the studio is so amazing, but it'll become white noise to me. I'm so like my blinders are on and I'm right with what's in front of me. And then I'll walk back into the studio and be like, holy shit, this place is fucking rad. Like, great. So it's incredible. I never thought I would be here. And I grew up really poor, but I also grew up very intellectual. So I grew up in a family that didn't have means, but who valued hard work, hard physical work, hard labor work. And it was this idea that like you should do the most difficult thing that you can because ego and pride. And so art wasn't valued because art was looked at like a joke. So I was always an artistic kid. I always wanted to lean into that, but it was never really valued. And I don't even think then in my wildest dreams, I would, have imagined me being a professional artist and a professional educator of other artists. Over the last year, I've really settled into myself and found confidence because I've always been a pretty self-hating, self-loathing person. So, up until recently, to be completely honest, I still had that bit in the back of my brain where I'm like, well, I'm actually a fucking imposter. And at some point, people are going to figure out that I don't belong here and that my work's actually not that good and that I'm just this and that I'm just that. And that voice was so loud that it was diminishing everything I was achieving, everything I was creating. And with a shit ton of work and therapy and just acknowledgement and realization over the past year. So I've really been like, oh yeah, I'm amazing at what I do. And I'm really great at it. And I've earned this. And it's been blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifice. And it feels nice to be able to just own all of this now. But that was hard coming to. It really was.
If people can't feel the passion you have for what you do with that statement you just laid down, then they're fucked. Because, dude, that shit gave me goosebumps, man.
It's wild. And like we had talked about before, it's probably relevant for those who are listening to hear. It's like photography saved my life. And I know, people, we use a lot of phrases in society now that don't have meaning behind them. Like we were talking, like someone's like, well, this is an authentic cafe latte. And you're like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Like and I'm not saying there can't be an authentic fucking cafe latte, but like all of these words and this like, oh, it saved my life. Like I found Bridgerton or whatever the fuck the name of the show is on Netflix and it saved my life. And it's like, all right, it gave you something to do on the weekend, but it didn't save your life.
Yeah.
And but for me, photography literally saved my life. Like I can say this with absolute certainty. I would be dead at my own hand had I not found photography. And so I always try and honor the medium that way. And so I give all of myself to this craft and to this medium and to this art form and to the people that I work with, whether they're in front of my camera or colleagues or friends or allied professionals or clients or those who sit in front of my camera. And that's a hard path to walk for those of us who are that passionate because it's so hard to see so many other people who simply do not care. And I know that applies to artists in any medium. You could look at literature, you could look at music, you could look at cuisine, you can look at sculpture, you can look at all of these things. And there are the people who give every molecule of their being to it. And then they look around and see other people who are just exploiting it, who are fly by night, who are just seeing what they can get from it. And so I'm grateful to have this passion, but it's like everything else in life. It's a dualistic thing where it's a blessing and a curse sort of simultaneously because you can't turn that off. It's just always on.
Yeah, it definitely is. So we talked a little bit earlier about the importance Threads has played in the current state of social media. I have a very love-hate relationship with social media.
Same.
Instagram, I use to DM people. Now that Threads is around.
Yeah.
I just found Threads instantly to be super supportive.
Same.
I found a group of people in the beginning and everybody still is so supportive. I get messages and contacts calling me and just talking about, man, we're proud of you for what you're doing. The podcast is going great. I love listening to it. And these are people I've never met in person.
Yeah.
I don't get that from the people I know.
Yeah. It's pretty wild, honestly.
It is. So being the best dressed man on Threads, how's your experience been on there?
It's been universally positive, to be completely honest. I remember when it first came out, I was super apprehensive, because I was like, oh, another fucking social media platform. And there were a bunch of people who were like, no, it's different. I'm like, that's what everyone says about everything. You can say like, oh, I don't like Italian food. And someone's like, but wait, dude, you got to come to this new Italian restaurant because it's different. And you're like, I just don't like I actually love Italian food. I'm half Italian, so I'm not knocking Italian food. Fellow Italians out there. But it was the same way. I jumped on it and I guess the best way to put it was initially it felt playful to me. I like if Instagram and all of these other platforms feel so serious and I'm on them and I'm very sort of like pragmatic. Where I'm like, well, I need to do things that are good for my business, that are good for my art. I need to be collaborating. I need to be networking. It's all very like driven and pointed. And I got on there and I just started posting like random meme bullshit and, like ranting about some things that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable about ranting on other platforms. And then found a really cool community of just like-minded, not just artists, but people. I think that's the biggest thing is really just rad humans who are on there sharing their experience, being more authentic, being more real. And even in terms of the work that was being shared, I'm sure you're the same way. And most people are like on Instagram, it's so heavily curated, so I probably have shared 0.00001% of my work on Instagram for a number of reasons. But on Threads, it's like I automatically felt comfortable being like, oh, hey, everyone, here's a sweet sunset I got on my iPhone. And I didn't even think twice about it. People are like, oh, that's so dope because they're not deconstructing it and being like, well, did you know that the resolution on the iPhone does not match the new Leica M whatever? They're just like, that's fucking rad. Beautiful sunset. Where are you at in the world? And so a lot of that pretense and the elitism and the bullshit wasn't and isn't there. And it just felt more human and more heartfelt. And it's still like that to this day. I know Dimitri was just, on the show with you. And he and I hit it off. And like last time I was in New York running a workshop, like we spent time together and we went to a Fuji party. So this is one of the few things where I've connected with people in a significant way and actually met up with them in real life. And it's gone off. And of course, like the lack of advertising right now, I hope that doesn't change, but it's super cool to be on a platform and to not be, getting mind analyzed at every moment. I know that they're taking what they learn about us on Threads and they're targeting our asses on like Facebook and Instagram, but to be able to just be on the platform and you're like, oh, it's just people and that's it. And it's artists. And then I'm going to curate this. So long-winded answer that could have been very simple. It's been really fucking cool for me. And I've met some great people, great friends, great colleagues. Business opportunities have come out of it, although that's certainly not what I'm looking for on the platform. And it just feels, it's like salt of the earth, down to earth type of stuff, where it's just, I see that people are much more comfortable being themselves. And in this world that's all about performative bullshit, that's all about theatricality, that's all about wearing masks, that's all about this polish and poise and panache, that's anything but real. It's so inspiring to me seeing people being real and being themselves and being seen and celebrated and accepted for that realness and that rawness. And so I hope it doesn't lose that magic moving forward.
I agree 100% with you there. When I got on there, it was pretty much instant. It was instant different.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
I recycled photos that on Instagram people would be like, same thing, getting all technical and bullshitty. But on there, that people are like, dude, this is so sick. What did you do? And I'm like, I don't know. I set it up, made sure it was in focus, pushed a button.
Yep.
The camera takes the picture, not me.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's the only thing. Artists are a myth.
All right. Your workshops. So describe to me what your workshops are. Are they different, or do you do kind of the same principle, just in different locations?
So I would say overall, just as a general bit, they're different than what most people have encountered. And I think that's one of the things that I did. Like it was a few years ago, like I've been doing mentoring for a long time. I've always been a teacher. Even when I was a kid in school, I was always tutoring and helping other kids. So teaching comes naturally to me. And I think that's because I love helping people. It's something that's near and dear to heart. But what I saw an absence of 3 years ago or so in the industry when I first started getting into these workshops was anything that was intangible. And when I say that, people felt very comfortable talking about like, oh, well, here's a light and here's a camera and here's a model and here's 3 triangles that the model is posing with and here's a background. But it was all so formulaic, and they weren't talking about like, all right, how do we connect with ourselves as artists? How do we step into our voice? How do we cultivate authenticity in ourselves so that we could be mirrors for others' authenticity? How do we fail? Let's fucking fail. Like, let's drop the bullshit and spend a day failing because we can't succeed without failing. And everything that we want is predicated on failure. So how do we reassess our notions of these words like failure and stumbling and how do we address imposter syndrome? So that was the heart of it for me, was wanting to inject some humanity and some intangible aspects into it, because the best artists that I know, generally speaking, are also the least successful artists that I know. And the best artists that I know feel the worst about their work. And looking out into that vast sea, I was like, all right, we need to be, I don't know, we need to be more vigilant about having these conversations and about figuring out paths forward for all of us. And so that's really where it started. So the main workshop that I do is called Artistic Alchemy. And it's because I believe what we do as photographers is alchemy. It's metamorphosis, it's transformation. There's this beautiful aspect of, time is fucking relentless, as we all know. Like, I'm reminded of that every day. I look in the goddamn mirror. And that's not a knock at all. It's just wild. And so we have an opportunity to stop time, to carve out time, and to archive these moments. And like, for the existence of humanity, this is such a short period when we've been able to do this. And now I'm getting completely sidetracked because ADHD, but really, like, it's all about connection to self first and foremost. And that's what it really comes down to for me, because I feel like if you don't feel good about yourself, if you're not confident in your work, if you're not confident in yourself as a photographer, you can't create an experience that's going to be spectacular for another person if you are lacking yourself. And so it comes down to that aspect. And of course, we go into everything. I deconstruct my whole process of lighting, styling, posing, all of this stuff from the guise of, I never want someone to replicate me. I want to equip an individual with the tools so that they can create their own vision, so that they can create their own style of art. So whenever someone's like, Jonny, what do you think of this? I'm like a psychotherapist. I'm like, what do you think of it? And they're like, well, I kind of don't like it. And I'm like, well, what kind of don't you like about it? And they're like, well, the shadows are too dark. And I'm like, perfect. Here's 3 ways we can bring those shadows up. So I never want someone to we don't need more Johnnies running around the world. What we need are artists who are being true to their hearts, their spirits, themselves, because that's when they can shine the brightest. And the world is so fucking dark right now that we need all the light that we can get. So ostensibly, that's what they're about. Some of the workshops are different. I tried doing a 1-day workshop, and I don't want to say it was a disaster, but it was hard for me. Like, it is priority, and I fucking talk way too much. So like, I talk a lot and I dive into subjects. So trying to encapsulate it into 1 day was really challenging. So they're all pretty much 2. They all cover the entire creative process, start to finish. They all feature a massive diversity of individuals that I work with. That's another thing I see in the industry. There tends to be a very specific archetypal individual who models at workshops. And they're younger and they're slimmer and they're very traditionally pretty and they tend to have a very specific skin tone. And so my bit was like, fuck that. We're going to photograph people of all ages, of all creeds, of all races, of all sizes, of all backgrounds, experienced and inexperienced, all of these things. Because like, if we're celebrating humanity is diversity, like, embodied. So let's actually bring some legitimate fucking diversity to this and work with people of all types and sorts. So that's another big part of it. And generally speaking, it's sort of like mad, honestly. I think that's how a lot of people have described these workshops. It's like going into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's some Mad Hatter shit where you sort of come in and it's like doing a big hit of like peyote or mushrooms. And you're just like, oh, this is scary, but it's cool. And this is really fucking amazing. And then like at the end, you're like, what happened? I'm a different person, but I don't know exactly why. And so many things happen in the midst of it that I think are hard to even quantify for me. But so I going back to it, I run these workshops here at my studio in Denver and then around the country. I do have a workshop coming up in September on the 17th and 18th with a friend of mine named David Shokri, and he's based out of the UK, and he is a brilliant portrait photographer. Very classical, timeless style of work. And we're doing something called dark beauty. And so I also co-produce workshops with other people, and those shift a little bit, since we're kind of working on it together. And this will be a little bit more lighting focused, a little bit more set design and color theory focused. But more than anything, I think I try and pivot relative to the group. Some of my workshops have been more technical. Some have been almost completely absent in technical detail. And that just is like, hey, as a group, what do we want? What do we need? What are we looking to get out of this? How are all of you going to feel the best? How can I deliver the best experience? So very much like when I photograph people, I try and cater as much as possible to the group and the individual who are attending, because ultimately I want people to walk away feeling inspired and feeling confident in themselves. I think that's the biggest thing. Confident in their abilities, confident in their voice, confident in what they do for other people. I want people to walk out with their head held fucking high, and then they see someone with their chin down and they're like, chin up, king, chin up, queen. And they get to spread that fucking forward. And like ripples in a pond, as ridiculously cliche as that sounds, this goodness and this gratitude and this passion moves out into the world. And that's my life's purpose, I believe. That's certainly my goal and aspiration.
I don't know if you realize when you describe your flow there's very little talked about actual camera photo work. It was more about empowering people. And that's what we need in this world.
Yeah.
I love that, man.
I appreciate
really
you taking
do.
note of that. Thank you.
I've learned so much by learning to be open about myself and who I am and the strength that I have and the fact that I show emotion and I'm not afraid to cry.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to tell people I'm hurting.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to tell people I have a therapist.
Yeah. Same.
I grew up playing football. So, I'm a big dude and I have that apparent look about me that people avoid. Yeah. And then they talk to me and they're like,
yep.
Holy shit. You're nothing like I thought you'd be. Right.
Which is, it's the ultimate kind of passive aggressive compliment too, because I'll get that, and people will be like, oh, you're smarter than I thought you were going to be, or you're sweeter than I thought you were going to be, or you're this. And I'm like, so you're basically saying you thought I was going to be a dumb asshole and I'm not. And I should say, thank you for your assumptions about me. But I get that. And it's wild to sort of be typecast into something. But I think in that way, you and me are in a really cool pivotal position because we do have a certain aesthetic or energy or what it is that people are assumptive about. And so when we are authentic and we do share our heart and we do speak to it and we do fucking cry and we do talk about therapy, that creates an open door for other people to do the same. And I don't want to get into like gender politics at all with this because I know that can be really divisive, but especially fucking men in our society. Like I grew up in a way where literally it was like my dad screaming in my ear. Like if I, shook more than 3 times after I peed, it meant that I was fucking gay and it meant that he hated me. And so many of us have grown up in that type of thing. So it's like, I always want to represent a different path forward for men to be like, you can be fucking vulnerable and you can be authentic and you can show tears. And that doesn't make you fucking weak. That makes you strong. That makes you a real fucking warrior, because when you can show that stuff, you can show up for the people in your fucking life and actually make a difference in this world and for your friends and for your fucking family. And that's what a real individual of merit does, not suppresses the shit and then goes out and starts projecting and taking it out on people who don't deserve that anger and that fucking hatred and that awfulness.
Yep. I grew up in I was born in the 70s. So I grew up through the 70s, 80s, 90s, men don't cry. Your feelings don't matter. Push them down. Yep.
Suppress. Always suppress.
I played baseball, hockey, football at a very high level. And the pivotal... Sorry, there's a helicopter flying over. Just bear with me here. I'm on a flight path, so... It's probably the police helicopter chasing people again.
The bird.
Yeah.
The bird chasing the prey.
Oh, it's crazy, man. It's every single night out here. Every night. I'm in, I have all around me, I have forest.
Yeah.
And rivers and stuff. So people run through them. They ditch
that
shit
makes
now,
sense.
Right? So, all right, go back to what I say. Start over. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, I was told, if you cry, you're a pussy.
Yeah.
If you show emotion or even to the fact that if you apologize to someone for doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Your parent, your father looked at you different.
Yeah.
And my dad didn't play. He was a Vietnam vet. I didn't understand PTSD because it wasn't really talked about back then.
Yeah. But
after he passed away and I started learning more about my own head traumas because I've suffered over 20 major concussions.
Yeah.
And that was what led me to quit sports. And I was getting yelled at by my father and the coach because I missed a play. And I'm like, I've played every second of every game for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I missed a play because I can't see.
Yeah.
But you're telling me to shake it off and get back in.
Yep. Yeah.
I went in, showered, grabbed my skateboard, rode away with double middle finger salute. Never played a sport again. And that's when my passion for skateboarding took off.
Hell yeah.
But mid-30s, man. So mid-30s, I was adopted. I grew up being told, don't tell anybody you're indigenous because they'll treat you different. So I had that shit all over my head, right? Like, why can't I just be me? That's what I'm telling myself. But no, I can't because people are so racist against indigenous culture that they're going to just go after me. Mid-30s, I started just really wanting to kind of figure out where I was from and who I was. And I was able to get involved in a few indigenous events. I felt like they were drumming and singing, and I felt this crazy energy come through the ground, through my feet, and go right out my head. And I'm looking at the people around me, and nobody's even looking. And I'm like, this just really fucking happened? Like, what the fuck is going on? This was right after I met my current wife, Tara.
Yeah.
So she was singing and singing and drumming, and I can pick her voice out of anywhere.
Yeah.
When she sings. So what's happening? There's a canoe that with full of indigenous people coming under the bridge I'm on. The helicopter's following them because they're leaving our town to paddle up the outside, cut up to Alaska, open waters in a canoe. And my friend Brandon was the skipper, and he's coming under the bridge, and I had him on, and I think he's episode, I can't remember now. Sorry, Brandon. But we talked about it on that one, and he's coming under the bridge, and he's like, I felt this energy rush leave my body. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, because it came up through mine, you fucker. That moment was my moment to know, like, I can let the stigma go of being this guy that has no emotion.
Yeah.
Everything I was told growing up was bullshit. It's okay for me to be emotional. It's okay for me to seek therapy. It's okay for me to be proud to be Indigenous. And that started my journey looking for my birth parents, right? So that was a 10-year journey. I found them. I just turned 47 when I found my birth mom, and then an hour later found my birth dad. And it was, my birth mom's amazing. That whole family. So my mom, Brenda, Jim, Jennifer, Michael, Carl, Kent, Laura. Nailed it. All my brothers are in the military. I love it. I think that's the coolest thing, right? Like,
that's badass.
I grew up as a single child, and knowing I have all these family members and brothers and sisters that absolutely care about me is pretty cool. My dad's side, aunts, uncles, cousins, absolutely amazing. My dad, nope, no contact whatsoever. I've talked to him once, and then I have two brothers on that side that occasionally I talk to my brother Nigel. But, they're doing their thing. They don't want to be a part of it. And I'm a 50-year-old man. And so I actually don't need anything from you, but I just wanted them to know I was here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dealing with all of that stuff really gave me the ability to come on this platform and be who I am. Right? Like, just like you talk about passion and empowering people and making people realize, like, if you like what you're doing and you're happy with the work and the product you're putting out, then fucking run with it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was long-winded on my answer, but there's a lot I try to get in a really short amount of time.
No, I'm the same way, and I feel like it's the free associative thinking. I feel like I'm getting to that grandpa age where my stories just meander, and all of a sudden I'm like, in 1988, I remember the first time I saw the MTV, and I'm like, ah, shit, it's happening.
The MTV that just aged you right there.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you should say that, and this is it's coming from a completely different place. But I was for a while here, I was heavily involved with the Lakota and Sioux nations in ceremony and supporting those communities, and I was tried to be as heavily involved even as a youth. I always felt this strong connection to the land and this great reverence for the indigenous people here and throughout the world. But I remember the first sweat lodge that I ever attended. There was like dance, there was singing rather, and drumming going on. And there was one woman singing, Alicia, who owned a tattoo shop here in Soul Tribe. She was actually murdered in her shop years ago. It was a giant national news story. But she was singing and drumming, and it sounded like 6 different voices coming out of her. Like I could hear her ancestors coming out of her. And I remember lying on the ground and weeping and talking to my dad, who had passed years ago. And still to this day, it remains one of the most cathartic and powerful experiences of my life, because I felt like in that moment, I was able to forgive my dad, and he was able to forgive me for the guilt that I had carried. And so I walked out of that ceremony feeling 1,000 pounds lighter. And I'm so grateful that I was invited and I could be part of that. And it's so visceral for me. Like I can remember the smells, I can remember the heat, I can remember the people who were sitting next to me, the feeling of their skin against mine. And it's really beyond powerful. Doesn't even fucking describe it. It's beyond words.
It's such an honor to be welcomed
absolutely.
into that as well. My wife has been named by the local community, which I think is the most beautiful thank you can get, to be welcomed in as an outsider into a community and be named. The culture in general, it's so welcoming.
Yeah.
When I was invited into a circle, and one of the kids that was there had his drum and he dropped it, and he was just going to pick it up, and the elder there stopped him and said, "No, we have protocols for this." He didn't scold them. He didn't get mad. He taught them while they did the protocols to clean the drum, because, you know, you have to show it respect. So you clean the drum and bring it back. And then he shared stories, and I was an outsider invited into this circle. So a lot of people who have the misconception that they don't like outsiders and all of this, you're so far off.
Yeah. Oh, completely and wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the triggering of memories one to the next. There was a gentleman who's still out here, and he's indigenous, and he has a wolf sanctuary. So they work with rehabilitating wolves and things like that. And my tattoo shop, All Sacred, and I, we were out there doing some volunteer work, helping. We were building a new enclosure, so we were putting fences out, and we had to bring a couple of plants up. We had to root them up and dig them up, and we went to start. And the gentleman came over, and he was like, "Wait." He was like, "Wait," before we did this. And we said words for the plant and for the life. And then we poured water. And he's like, "When we take, we give back." And literally, I'm almost in fucking tears. I got chills saying that. This fucking reverence the world and for everything that's living, you know, down to this plant, to be like, we honor you, plant, and we're taking from you, earth, and we're giving back to you at the same time. It's such a fundamental thing at the most basic level, and it's something that we have completely and totally lost touch with as a Western society, as a first world nation, whatever it is. It's like we literally just walk on this fucking earth without even being aware that we're walking on this fucking earth. It's maddening, and so it's a crazy thing.
I used to have when I started shooting, I really got into wildlife shooting.
Yeah,
and I would take a photo, say, of an owl or a bear. And I'd always, after I got the photo, I'd thank the bear for its time.
Yeah.
I'd be like, thank you for showing yourself to me today.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And people would turn and look at me like I was crazy.
Of course.
And I'm like, well, they're a living creature and they're a powerful being. So we have to give them thanks for what they're giving us at this moment. And
absolutely.
People just want to take. And I think if we can get even a handful of people to understand, like, respecting, one, the earth. We need trees. We need water. You know, we keep tearing them down for greed and money. Like, that's just going to take us in a completely different path. It's all over the place on this one.
That's okay. I think sometimes, and the curious thing for me is all of this is related.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, at least in the way that my mind works and thinks. Like, I have reverence for the people I photograph. I have reverence for this earth. I have reverence for my own life. I'm so grateful for all of it, and it intermingles. And the more whole that we become, the more whole we are and complete we are in this world that we exist in for this period of time. And I don't think that those things happen in separate domains. And so I think it's great when these conversations kind of go all over, and it's hard, and it's nice to talk to someone where I'm like, wait, you fucking sit there and stare at the stars at night and think you're significant, but also you're insignificant. You have an existential fucking panic attack. Sweet. Like, that makes me feel less alone. Cool.
Dude, I've had so many weird experiences when it comes to stars and aliens and all that. Yep, I believe in aliens and Sasquatch, people.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me too for people to talk about things from a science. You know, like, science is its own ideology. You know, so people are like, oh, they're in. I can't even get into the religious ideology thing, but it's like science is an ideology unto itself because it claims to know things that it doesn't. And in 10 years, we realized that what we knew wasn't accurate, and that's how things move along. That's the awareness and collective consciousness evolving. But you know, just from a scientific perspective, a statistical perspective, it's statistically insignificant, like impossible that there are not fucking aliens. So whenever I get into that conversation with someone, they're like, "Well, actually, according to the Pythagorean theorem," I'm like, "Yeah, fucking asshole." Like, science-wise, like, given the infinite vastness of things, are you saying that we exist in a vacuum and infiniteness, and that there is nothing more advanced than us? Like, it's almost asinine to me when someone's like, "You believe in aliens, you quack." I'm like, how do you not just see that as a very valid possibility?
Yeah.
I'm gonna get death threats over this too. Watch this. I'm gonna have some fundamentalists sending severed cows' heads to my house now, being like, "You fucking."
Yeah.
Well, which is I invite that, please. Like, send it to me. I will grill it up and eat it and honor the head. Let's do it, y'all.
I'll share a story with you that is kind
Please.
of down that line. So my mom passed away in 2015 after a year and a half of battling a lung transplant that was failing. And she came home for Christmas in 2014, and she was my girlfriend at the time, Tara, over for Christmas dinner. So we got to spend this day with my mom. She'd been in the hospital almost a year at this point. And I walked back down the hallway towards her bedroom because she wanted to talk to me. And she showed me a ring, and she said, "When you're ready to propose, you have to use this ring. This is my great grandmother's." And it had 2 rubies in it and then diamonds. She said, "I'm going to take diamonds out of one of my rings and have them set where the rubies are." And I was like, "Okay, cool, Mom." Like, yeah, ha, 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 you know. My mom went back into the hospital December 26th. She was back in the hospital. She passed away on St. Patrick's Day. 2 months later, Tara and her kids were up at her in-law or at her parents' place up in Soyuz, BC. I got a call randomly from a jeweler in my mom's little town she lived in. And I said, yeah, my mom's passed away. What's there? So I went. They said, "Oh, we have a ring and some other stuff she had here to get cleaned." So I went, and I got there, and they opened the box, and it was this ring.
Wow.
And I was like, "Are you kidding me right now?" So on my way back, I call my boss, and I'm like, "Hey, are you cool covering me for the rest of the day?" And he's like, "Yeah, why?" I'm like, "'Cause my mom asked me to use this ring to propose to Tara, and she had it sent in and had her diamonds put in it, and this is what I just picked up, and I'm driving the 5 hours to Soyuz to do this tonight." So he goes, "Yeah, man, I got you." So I went home, packed, didn't tell anybody I was coming. I showed up there. It was late. It was probably midnight by the time I got there.
Yeah.
And then we went down. We'd always go down. Anytime I'd come up, we'd go sit right by the lake.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Soyuz is British Columbia's desert.
Okay. I did not know that.
Beautiful, like warm nights, but you get this beautiful cold lake. So we're sitting there right on the lake, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do it. I don't do good with those things. So, I finally just was like, "Hey, why don't we just do this forever?" And I showed it to her, and she said yes. And we put it on. The ring was the perfect size, which was crazy. Like it slid right on. Perfect. And as we put the ring on, these stars came down like they were shooting stars straight at us. And I was like, "Did you see that?" And she's like, "Yeah, I did. I was hoping nobody else did." And we had it was just like this energy burst coming from the sky with these stars shooting down on top of us. It was an incredible experience. Knowing that my mom had preemptively done that, and she was only home for 2 days.
Yeah.
To get that done. So that's my story.
That's an incredible fucking story. Like, what beautiful magic and synchronicity and like the perseverance of love and personhood and all that. Thank you for sharing that.
It's I just felt it works in that moment, and I don't know if I've ever shared that story with anyone before.
Well, that is an incredible fucking story. If the timing's right, you should share it more, because that's truly special.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Dude, this has been fantastic today. Thank you so much for the time.
Oh, thank you. Are you kidding me? Please.
I got about 20 minutes before I have to get on household duties here. So
I get it.
Let's do a quick, we'll do a talk about the creativity and mental health connection.
Yeah.
And then we'll shoot into just offering some wisdom.
Okay.
Before we sign off.
Sounds great.
What is your feelings on the connection between your creativity and mental health?
I mean, sort of like what I alluded to earlier, creative expression in all forms has quite literally saved my life. And I had the extreme example of picking up the camera and it saving my life when I was at that hard point. But even when I was a kid, like, I grew up with so much abuse. I grew up with so much neglect. My first art form was actually writing. It was poetry. So, when I was 6 or 7, I remember picking up a pen and a pad for the first time and just writing a bunch of stuff, like directly and then indirectly, metaphorically, and it feeling like someone was listening, like some part of me that was anchoring me down into the water relented so that I could come up for a breath of air. So throughout my life, like artistic expression has got me going and kept me alive. And I think in that way, that's why so much of my stuff, people, I've literally been told it's like, it's cliche, but like so many of the words I use, like alchemy in my work and magic and this type of stuff, I literally believe that art is alchemy. I believe that it is like artistic expression is the philosopher's stone. I feel like we get to turn trauma into triumph. I feel like we get to take the worst moments of our life and translate those and metamorphose those into expression and connection. And to me, there's nothing more fucking powerful in this world. And it is so significant and it is so important. And I think that all people are creators. I believe that. I believe that every individual has a creative, whatever you want to call that, calling or spirit or element to their personhood. And it comes out in different ways. And I've known accountants who are artists. Like I literally have known friends who are accountants, and watching them work and do a fucking audit, it was like a symphony. They gave themselves to it, and they were so passionate and so creative in the way that they approached their art form. And so I think it's absolutely direct, and it allows us to speak to ourselves. It allows us to speak to our experiences. It allows us to speak to and connect with one another. And I have found my best friends through art. I have found my place and purpose in this world through art. I've been resurrected through art. So for me, creativity and artistic expression is foundational to who I am. And I would love to see a greater emphasis on it in the therapeutic world, in the mental health world, to say like, hey, I've always had a fucking therapist. I've had two at times. Like therapy is great. That's really, really beautiful. But like, that's not the panacea. It doesn't answer all things, you know? And for me, art and creative expression has given me a way to actively work through trauma, to actively work through pain, to take those things and process them not only on a conscious, but a subconscious level, to where I got done. And something that had bothered me and plagued me my whole life, it's like I did a shoot about it and I was like, I don't know why or how, but I don't feel the same way anymore. I don't feel that same hole in my fucking chest when I think about that person this way. And so it's filled me in, you know, like a hole with walls. It's allowed me to patch this and to stay fucking buoyant and to help and support other people doing the same. And if it sounds like I'm blowing smoke, I'm not. It's so important and significant to me, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I even do what I do as an educator, because there's this aspect, we're so fucking money driven, and there's nothing wrong with money. I've lived without money. Living without money is not fucking fun unless you're literally like off the grid in the woods, living as humans were intended to live. But in a societal structure in a city, living without fucking money is brutal. But we're so hyper fixated on consumption and on materialism and on money that so many photographers that come to my workshops have good businesses or whatever it might be, but they've lost touch of their artistic voice. Everything is so directed. Everything is so pragmatic. Everything is so professional. Everything has an endpoint, that what I love to be able to do is say, no, we're bringing this back to you. We're bringing this back to you as an artist and as a creator, into your art form, creating singularly for yourself. So if it doesn't do good on Instagram, or your mother, brother, sister, father, son, partner, neighbor, friend, stranger doesn't like it, fuck them. Who cares? It wasn't for them. Everything doesn't have to be for something else. So coming back to create for you and then create for others, and seeing how that's transformed people, and seeing how they've come back to life, and then getting followed up and being like, oh, Jonny, look, I did this shoot for myself, and I've been wanting to do this dark macabre thing, and everybody in my city, my small town, my family hates it, but I'm so excited. And I'm like, yes, because it's your life. It's your fucking life. It's your existence. And it's our responsibility with our lives to take them by the horns and to lead and live the lives that we want to live. And so, yeah, obviously, I feel very strongly about the correlation. And I feel like it plays a massive role. Anyone that I know who suffers with mental wellness or mental illness, however we want to phrase that now, art has helped them. I do not know one person who has struggled in some way where art has not been a catalyst or has not been a breath of fresh air, or where it has not lifted them up. So I think it's imperative. And we talk about it. I feel like in mainstream Western society, it's still talked about like crafts. You know, it's like, oh, well, you have a podcast. Oh, that's cute. You're a photographer. Oh, that's nice. What do you do for real work? So it's so diminished. And I would like to see it elevated and lifted back up to a focal point of society, and especially to a focal point of mental wellness approaches, because I think that it's it's a really beautiful direct and indirect way to connect with ourselves and to heal, and in that process to connect with one another and to help other people to heal as well.
I couldn't have said it better myself, man. I love that. Create for yourself. That's what everybody's hashtag should be. I created this for me, so fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. Literally, and have the double finger salute with pride.
Yeah.
You know, and whenever someone comes to me, it's so funny. I think new artists tend to be reasonably fragile. When I first picked up my camera, I gave way too much weight and credence to people who I should have never given a fuck about. You know, so it's like someone on a forum, you know, Jeremy on the forum was like, well, actually, that's a great portrait, but if you would have done this, this, and this, it would be better. And because I didn't know any better, I was like, oh shit, I thought this was great and maybe it's not. And one of the most liberating things for me, I think, was the first time I told someone to fuck off who was like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like how you crop this. I'm like, good, asshole. I don't give a shit. And then I just sat back and I was like, yeah. And it's not that I wanted to be offensive to them. I don't know who they are, but for me, it was an assertion of self to say, I created this for me. I love it. You don't have to love it. And you know what? That's fine. It doesn't matter to me because this isn't for you. I didn't put this out there for you. I did it for me, and I did it for the individual who is part of this project with me. And whether or not it resonates with anyone else is completely inconsequential. And people talk to me a lot about developing their artistic voice because they're like, oh, Jonny, I know your work right when I see it. Like I can tell it's yours. And that's one of the greatest compliments to me. But it's following that internal compass, that internal guidepost. Because if I would have listened to what everyone else was saying about my work over the past 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't have a visual signature. It would blend homogeneously into the rest of Instagram, into the rest of the portfolios, into the rest of everything else. It was me finally saying, you know what? I'm going to create things that feel amazing to me. I'm going to create in the voice that I have, the one voice that I have, and I'm going to fucking scream it from the rooftops. And when I started owning that, that's when I started to take on a certain creative archetype and a certain creative style. But we have to own our power before we can do anything with it. And it sounds so cliche, but it's so true.
It is, for sure. When I first realized that I didn't follow the trends with my editing and with the way I captured photos, everybody's like, you have to edit all the same. They have to look uniform. And I'm like, but I want to edit how my eye saw it.
Yeah, I love that.
It may not be the same way that nature intended, but my eye saw something in that image, in the color profile that I chose. So that's why it's that way.
Yeah.
You know? And then you mentioned having a podcast and being diminished. I remember I was talking to someone right before I launched the first episode, and they're like, so what are you going to, you can't put all your eggs in that basket. And now I get to say, well, you know, I'm top 10 in over 3 million podcasts. I've got thousands of listens. You know, I'm doing okay.
Well, I think in addition to that, for me, it's also just been the realization. Number one, I can't give a fuck. We can't give a fuck about what other people think. We can't live our lives for anyone else. But ultimately, life is generally, when it comes to communication, it's projection. We're constantly projecting onto one another. We're projecting our bias. We're projecting our fears. So if you take someone who's living a mediocre life for them, they're not happy with their job, they're not happy with their partner, they're not happy with where they live, and you're like, hey, I divorced so-and-so and I'm moving to fucking Bali and I'm starting a basket weaving business. They're going to hate on that immediately because it represents an antithesis to the life that they're leading. And instead of dealing with their own shit, instead of going like, wow, that's really amazing and inspiring, I want to be liberated, I want to be joyful, it's much easier to cut someone down than it is to lift yourself up. And so people operate on that premise in the path of least resistance. So now when I have what I would consider to be, you know, a stereotypical type of I'm just living the sheeple life and they shit on me about my life or my choices, I'm like, that's actually great. Because if you don't agree with where I'm at and what I'm doing, it means I'm exactly where I need and want to be. So thank you for validating me in your attempt to invalidate me. I appreciate it greatly.
So do you have any advice or wisdom you can share to people that are listening on how to just own yourself? Like just own your work? I know we just touched on it a bit, but I know there's more in there.
I think there is a certain aspect of faking it till you make it. Honestly, as fucked up as that sounds, but I think that at first we just have to operate under the premise that we are better equipped and more confident than we are and step into the world like that. So many of us operate from this place of masks, like we talked about earlier. So we wear masks when we're with family, we wear masks at work, we wear these masks that we feel fit in with societal archetypes and stereotypes. And I think there's power in that, because if we can decide the mask that we have on, even if I'm not confident, I could put my confident mask on. And there may not be a lot behind that, but if I start to operate that way, the world starts to relate to me in that way. And then I start to embody that in a more authentic way. So I think there's that. And I think it's just, it's creating room for experimentation, creating room for failure, embracing failure more than anything else. I think that's been one of the biggest things for me, is to embrace every fuck up, every failure, every humiliation, every letdown. Every time I've set out to do a thing and I haven't done a thing, going, that got me one step closer. And it's so, so important and so vital. And it's so hard because everyone has their own trajectory in this, right? Like, I think that we're all essentially aiming for a similar endpoint, but the way that we get there, someone takes the high road, someone takes the ocean, someone's in a boat, someone's in a car, someone's on a camel, someone's crawling through mud and shit, you know? So there's all of these different paths, and all of those encompass so much else. But I think it's just an understanding that regardless of what comes after this, we have this one life to live here and now. And saying, what if it goes right? You know, because there's always, what if it goes wrong? What if everything fucks up? And I'm like, what if it doesn't? And what if it does fuck up? Guess what? You know what you do? You just keep going. And if it fucks up again, you keep going. And if it fucks up again, you keep going. My life has been one continuous fuck up after the next. And the only reason I'm here right now is because every point in time I got back on the metaphorical horse. And I'm like, I don't know whether I'm going to go 500 miles or 500 feet or 5 inches, but I'm going to get back on and keep riding into that fucking sunset. And that level of resiliency, if you put one foot in front of the other and you do that continuously, you will get to where you want to be. It's physics. It will absolutely happen, but you have to do that. And nothing substitutes for that. Nothing can substitute for one foot in front of the other. And you can think about it theoretically, and you could read, and you could go to workshops, and you could do self-help, and you could plan, and you can strategize, and you could do all of these things. But if you're not in motion, you are not getting any closer to where you want to be.
Mic drop.
And I will say, as a caveat to that, like, rest is important too. So I don't want to put it out there to be like, you know, lending itself to toxic grind culture. Like, we have to fucking rest. Like, we need to rest. We need to relax. We need to not be working. We need to fucking lay in a field and stare at the clouds for 24 hours straight. Absolutely necessary. So there is that element too. But overall, from a pragmatic perspective, I think once you can find that balance between going even when you don't feel like going, and getting your ass back up when you fall, and at the same time listening to your body intuitively, listening to your spirit intuitively, and being like, I'm burnt the fuck out. I'm not going to talk to anyone for a day, and that's okay. That's when the magic starts to happen, because you can operate at full bore in a very consistent fucking way with your blinders on to all the haters, the naysayers, the bullshit. And you live your life and you do your thing, and beautiful things unfold in front of you on that path. It's an assurance.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom today. Yeah, I think we got everything we need.
Brilliant.
Maybe throw you where people can find you. You know, what's the best place to find you?
So it depends. Obviously my website, I don't know if people even use websites anymore. I totally feel like I'm out of touch with that too. I'm like, my website. You can look at my work and or contact me through my website, which is jonnyedward.com. There's no H in Johnny and there's no S in Edward. So it's like two first names, JONNYEDWARD. So you can find me on the web there. You can also find me on Instagram at Jonny Creative, JONNY Creative. People always, I feel like more people know me as Jonny Creative than my real legal name, Jonny Edward. And the funny thing is, I started my Instagram about over a decade ago simply to archive my tattoo work. So I had no interest in anything else. People were asking me about my tattoos. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to post photos and stuff on there. And I could be like, go to my Instagram, even though I loathe social media. But someone had my name in England, Jonny Edward. And so I just randomly decided on Jonny Creative. I was like, I don't give a shit at that point in time. And I chose it. And for years after that, I would write this person in England. They have like 0 followers. They're inactive. And I was like, dude, I'll Venmo you or PayPal you. Or back then it was probably, I'll send you a check, you know, for $300 if you just give me that name. And they never did. But now if I'm at conferences or on the street, people be like, yo, Jonny Creative. And I'm like, at this point, I might just need to legally change my name to Jonny Creative. You can find me there. You can find me on Threads. Obviously, we had that discussion. It's a super cool platform. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend that you do. Really unique, really supportive. And obviously, like anywhere else, there's good and there's bad on there, but there's much more good to me than there is on a lot of other platforms. I'm on Threads as well. Or, just stop in Denver and you may see me walking around in a top hat and a 3-piece suit in 100-degree weather, just fucking dying for the fashion. So, but yeah, online, those are the main places you can find me.
Well, Jonny, thank you so much. Thanks for your time. I'm privileged to call you a friend.
Likewise, my friend, truly. I mean that.
I look forward to, at some point, meeting up somewhere.
Oh, it'll be great.
Whether it's one of your events somewhere or in Denver. I have another friend in Colorado. I just had him on, Joe Picara.
Yeah.
He works for Gene Unit and 50 Cent.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Like, super cool story. We've become friends. We're texting each other all the time.
Yeah.
So after every show, I'll fire you my number so we can stay in contact. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Life of Phys Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed our show, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content and the stories of our incredible guests. And remember to stay connected with us on all social media platforms. It's at LIFE_OF_PHYS or on the internet at www.lifeofphys.com. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day.